Welcome to this month's Conservation Conversations. I'm Sean O'Brien, the president of NatureServe, and I'm your host. This month on Conservation Conversations, we have two really interesting young men who I met recently at a conference on native pollinators. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and a little bit about their background. But I was really excited to get to meet them because one of the things that we think about is next generation and who are going to be the leaders in the future. And I think it's easy to be cynical for adults. And I don't not mean to call you guys adults, but like older adults like me, to be cynical about the next generation. And are they going to be participants in fixing the world? And what is their role in that? And I think the two of you are doing an amazing job of establishing yourselves as leaders in the field of making sure that we have a healthy planet for future generations. And so I want to thank you for that right up front. And then introduce you. So I have Collin Spriggs and Brandon Gibson, who both live in Oklahoma. They grew up together and now as young adults are working together in the same field, which I think is super exciting. And so Brandon and Collin, welcome to Conservation Conversations.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, so we met at the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators conference last year, which is a really interesting conference, probably the most interesting conference I've ever been to, because it was both scientific, it had traditional knowledge, it had emotional presentations, it had hardcore science presentations, demonstrations of different methods for attracting native plants and native pollinators and propagating native plants. So that was really exciting. But you guys, tell me a little bit about each of your backgrounds. And you guys know each other well enough that you know who goes first.
I guess I'll go first. Yeah. My name is, like Sean mentioned, Brandon Gibson, Euchee Abene. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. I'm also Cherokee and Choctaw as well. I grew up here in Oklahoma, over in Wagner, Oklahoma. Went to school at Northeastern State University. I have a bachelor's in organismic biology with a minor in environmental. And then prior to starting at Tribal Alliance for Pollinators in 2020, I was a wildlife field technician and mainly doing ornithological field work for a couple of years. So tracking prairie chickens, looking for Henslow sparrows habitat, primarily in Nebraska, Minnesota, and here in Oklahoma, doing bird surveys. And so that's sort of how I got my first start off, and then sort of jumped right into the tap and been loving it ever since. But
awesome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Collin Spriggs. I am a member of the Cherokee Nation, and I started here back in 2019. So it's been 5 years, which is kind of crazy. I also grew up in Wagner. We've been friends since about like 7th grade or so. And then we went to the first year of college together in undergrad at NSU, Northeastern State University in Tahlequah. Then I transferred to OU to finish out my degree in environmental science and a minor in upright bass performance.
Awesome. And a little surprise there.
We're seniors of TAP. I just realized
we are seniors.
4th year's TAP.
That's right. So tell me a little bit about the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, because you all have sort of, it seems like multiple affiliations, but I think that's the primary one.
Yeah. People sort of know us as the Euchee butterfly farm.
Right.
That's mainly what's, labeled out front on the gate and such. But primarily what we do, and I feel like it's a big part of a majority of the farm, really, outside of the butterfly stuff, is the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators work. And so we're the sort of the more botany focused side of trying to preserve pollinators. And so we're both program coordinators, our titles, but we kind of serve more as the botanist of the farm in terms of providing the actual ecological knowledge and identifying species and collecting seeds. Because that's mainly what we do is we collect seeds from all throughout Oklahoma, and then we grow them out, and we take very good record keeping of them as well, so we know exactly where all of our plants are collected from. We don't order any of our seeds at all, so everything's locally collected here in the state of Oklahoma, which is important to us. not only for scientific reasons, but as well for sort of more cultural reasons as well. It's important to sort of remediate the land with what was already here, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years ago. And so it's important to keep this in respect and preserve the land that we have currently. And because, as you know, I mean, things aren't really necessarily getting any better in terms of development upon habitat. And so we're here sort of just to provide the tribe specifically, because we are the tribal alliance for pollinators, the tribe specifically, these resources and these plant plugs, all available to them at no cost, which is really nice. And so we just have to grow them out and then just find some home for them, is what Collin and I's primary purposes here on the farm.
Right. So there's so many things I want to follow up on. First of all, I want to thank you for the seeds that you gave me when I was up there. I'd looked them all up to make sure that they're all native to where I am. So the species that you gave me, I can grow here in Virginia without feeling like I'm doing the wrong thing for native plants. So that's a great thing. But I also really appreciated that you all are both referencing other information to learn about how to propagate these plants, but you're figuring this out for yourselves. And I'm really interested in that because I think there's some species of plants that people grow in their yards and we know how to grow them all day long, but there's lots of native plants that nobody's ever taken the time to figure out how to propagate. And you mentioned you have a seed bank of 250 species, I think.
Yeah, it's about 250. We still need to audit it for this year because we've added a lot of species over the last 2 years and we haven't had a chance to really go through the entire seed bank and really figure out what's going on in a little while. So hopefully we can do that this month into next month.
250 is a safe bet.
250, yeah.
It's
250, give or take 10, 15 or so.
It's probably more given
It's probably
the last
more.
field season.
Yeah.
So what is a seed bank for people who are listening?
So the seed bank here at Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, and so our seed bank is, we're very proud of it because it's the largest native plant seed bank here in Oklahoma by far. It's really Collin and I that have sort of compiled all of these seeds together and organized it. And, we're just two guys and we're competing with universities and, that have their own seed banks, tribes that have their own seed banks, which is great. But they're primarily focused a lot of the time, or at least with the tribes, on a lot of cultural seeds, which is fantastic. So heirloom, and we're getting into that as well. But in terms of native plant seed bank, we definitely have the largest seed bank in Oklahoma. And so we collect all these seeds, we can preserve them for many, many years. And so we've grown seeds that have been collected back in, 2014, milkweeds that were collected from somebody that's like now over at OSU or something like that. And so if you store these seeds in the proper manner, you can keep these things going for, generations in terms of preserving them. And so it's really important for us to not only preserve the seeds themselves, but also preserve the genetics. Me being ornithologist prior to this, doing prairie chicken work with terms of rearing and trying to release stuff, genetics are always going to be a big, big, big aspect of it. And so I'm very cognizant of trying to keep genetics in line. People always ask me that with terms of, if you clone this thing over and over and over, are you worried about genetics? I absolutely am. And that's why I clone different populations of, things that I am cloning. So vines and things like that. Because I want to keep a good genetic line. And so we're pretty aware of that. But that's mainly what the seed bank is sort of just, a ton of seeds that are native to Oklahoma, collected here in Oklahoma, and organized by the region that they're at. And so when we do these plantings or we give out seeds to people here in Oklahoma, we try to divvy it as close as possible to the county that they're in. And that's sort of the easy way to go about it. But yeah.
And you're providing these seeds to who? Are people paying you for seeds? Is someone doing a prairie restoration? Like, what's the purpose that people want these native seeds for?
Yeah, we're sort of a really unique organization in that purpose. And the sense that we don't charge anything ever. All of our seeds, all the things that we collect, all the things that we grow, all the things I have growing right now are all completely, free of charge to any tribal member here in Oklahoma. tribal individual, or the tribes themselves, or maybe somebody working for the tribes that's not actually even associated with the tribes, but if they're working for the tribe, we can still provide them all of these plants, plugs that we grow, and all of the seeds that we collect, which is really, really awesome for us because there's a big demand for it around here. Oklahoma is really picking up in terms of the native plant gardening. I know it's the surrounding states like Colorado have kind of, been more active in it, but it's sort of leaking over to Oklahoma now, where people are getting a lot more interested. And so we can remediate a lot of these tribal lands, these private landowners or the tribes themselves in terms of headquarters for educational reasons as well, and as well as medicinal purposes, which is another big aspect of the seed bank. And what we do is just providing culturally significant plants to the tribes themselves. And so they don't have to go out into the native habitat and harvest these plants themselves. We can grow 50 plant plugs for them easily of, X species, and then they can plant it near their headquarters, and then have their own little teaching garden there and, teach youth about it. Cause that's another big aspect of what we do is education aspects of it.
Yeah, I want to follow up a little bit on our use of language. So we've been using the word native potentially in two senses. Native plants, meaning plants that naturally grow in a certain area, and then native people or tribal people, whatever. And there's a little bit potentially of confusion where we're talking about native plants. We're not saying plants that are necessarily culturally significant to native people or were food sources for native people. We're saying plants that are native to the area, and they may or may not have a correlation or a relationship with tribal people. Is that right?
Yeah. And so it kind of becomes a little confusing. There's the term native, non-native, invasive, exotic, and it kind of gets mixed up a bit. But I would say the strict botanical terms of it would be things are either invasive or non-invasive / native. Invasive would include your Japanese honeysuckle, things that are from Eurasia, Europe, and Asia. South America, Africa. Mullein would be a good example of something that's invasive. It's from Africa originally, but it's spread over here, throughout, people traveling back and forth between continents. And it sort of pops up all throughout Oklahoma. I'm sure everybody knows mullein. And it's kind of interesting because mullein was also a heavily medicinal plant as well. And so even though it's not native to the US, it still has been heavily documented as being a medicinal plant throughout the tribes, not only through Cherokee Nation, but sort of every nation throughout Oklahoma really has used mullein as sort of a cough medicine, essentially. Huh. And so there is a difference between, the way you can kind of view the stuff. People ask us for mullein and they're like, oh, we don't go to that because it's non-native, but, it's sort of everywhere around here in Oklahoma now. It's being naturalized almost, which is a different term of sort of the in-between of invasive and native would be like naturalized. Yarrow falls in that sort of gray area as well.
Yeah. Now, Collin, tell me a little bit about the Butterfly Farm and the relationship between the Butterfly Farm and the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators.
The two are kind of like sister organizations. We help each other out in every respect. If we need help for a TAP event or something, the Butterfly Farm will help us. If they need help, we help them. The Butterfly Farm there's a couple different programs. Jane has lots of different programs going on all at the same time. I don't know how she keeps track of it all because I certainly can't.
So you're talking about Jane Breckenridge, who
yes, Jane Breckenridge,
is a board member at NatureServe.
Yep. She is the director of the Euchee Butterfly Farm, Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, all the programs here at the Butterfly Farm. Yes.
I would say that one of the big benefits of, not only having Tribal Alliance for Pollinators and the Euchee Butterfly Farm in the same location is, let's be honest, some people think plants are boring. I love grasses. I love looking at grass. I understand that people don't get jazzed up as bad as I do, but everybody loves butterflies.
Yeah.
Everybody loves butterflies, from kids to adults. You throw someone in a room with 1,000 butterflies in there, they're going to be amazed, and that's going to be something that they remember. And that's really what's important about the Euchee Butterfly Farm to me is getting people interested and realizing that, this, 1,000 monarchs in this one room used to be a common thing throughout Oklahoma back 50 years ago, even that close. And so you never know what's going to hook people in. I remember growing up looking at birds and stuff like that. I didn't think it was anything significant, but eventually that grew as I grew up, that interest. And so getting kids in that butterfly room, getting them to catch butterflies around the farm, maybe I can sneak in some botany knowledge around the butterflies, but whatever gets people interested in just the idea of conserving this habitat. And so I can show them grasses, but it's really helpful to be able to show them the butterflies themselves and what they are going to attract outside of just growing this nice lush green, prairie system essentially.
So I do think that you're exactly right, that motivating people through whatever means we can to care and to get interested. And if butterflies are your gateway into caring about plants of all different kinds, not just milkweeds for monarchs, but all different things that butterflies depend on for habitat and for food, I think that's really important. And it's great, like you said, to have those two things together, which makes me want to ask what inspired the two of you to be interested in this. I mean, generally, seventh graders don't get on the bus together and look at each other and say, you know what I'm really into? I'm really into grasses.
That would be a surprise for sure.
That would be a surprise.
Funny story is that's actually how it started. We kind of, we went to college together. Our freshman year of college, we roomed together. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went to college because my dad said I should go to college. And outside of that, I had no plan. And then I kind of started taking science classes. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I took my first ornithology course. And I was like, oh, people will pay me to look at birds and walk around the woods. That's awesome. And so that's sort of where I leaned into. And then I did wildlife technician work. And, we kind of separated for a couple of years while I was doing Nebraska and Minnesota stuff. And meanwhile, I was doing that. Collin was at Oklahoma University. Do you want to?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I don't know. My interest in plants has always been there, and interest in biology has always been there. I initially thought it was going to be like a pre-med route, just because that's what you do. My mom also worked for a hospital as the president of HR for many, many years. So I was around that sort of scene a lot. So I thought that's what I wanted to do in biology. I knew I wanted to help people or plants or something. And then eventually I came to the realization that I needed to do biology work. Mm-hmm. And I thought at first, that was going to be law focused, like environmental law. Took my first governmental class and I was like, nope, definitely not. It's definitely not that. That's not it. But then I figured out I wanted to do true boots on the ground. I wanted to get firsthand restoration work and preservation work. That's what I figured out that I wanted to do. It just took me a little while to get there.
And it was kind of funny. And, after the Nebraska prairie chicken job ended, I was looking for a position here and I was like, I don't really want to travel too much. Cause at that point I was like, I would have to go to like the Northwest or something, or, a different state. And I was like, I kind of want to stay in Oklahoma. And then right when I came back, I met up with Collin, just, hanging out. And he mentioned that like, oh, we actually are looking for somebody. Just now, Jane Breckenridge, like you mentioned, is just put out like looking for someone to hire essentially. And so Collin went back to Jane and said, I think I might just have the right person to fill this position. And so that's where I came in.
That's awesome. I was actually going to ask who was there first and how did it all come to pass? So you've covered that for me, which is great. I'm wondering if you all now in your role think about like the next generation behind you, and if you're going into schools at all, or what kind of programs you run for school children or anything to help educate them.
Yeah, I sort of briefly touched on it, but education is a big part of the farm. It's really sort of focused through the Euchee butterfly farm side, because tribal lines for pollinators, everything's laid out very specifically with grants, but we still do a lot of education as well in terms of workshops, seed stratification, seed collection, plant identification. And it's great to get a lot of the youth out here. And so we do groups of schools that will come by quite often. And so it's sort of just a people are starting to hear about us now. And so we're getting a lot of emails from a lot of the local schools trying to plan field trips, which we like a lot because like you sort of mentioned, we need to be training the next generation essentially. And thankfully, it's a lot more accessible than, say a decade ago in terms of, native habitat restoration. There's all these, smartphone apps that can identify a lot of these plants to you for pretty generally, not always down to the species level, but it at least gives you a good start. And so teaching the kids how to use that, teaching the kids, just to walk around a true prairie is one of the biggest aspects of why our location is so important because we're in South Bixby, Oklahoma, which is sort of Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the larger cities in Oklahoma. From our location, you can be downtown Tulsa where all the bars are and everything's happening in 35 minutes. That's really important because a lot of these kids that grow up in rural Tulsa, they might see a monarch every now and then throughout the summer, every couple weeks or something like that. But they can drive 30 minutes to our location and see, hundreds of monarchs, as well as different species of butterflies and bees as well. And then sort of, it's always funny because we always have, when we have kids come here, there's always those kids that are scared of bees and butterflies because they're not used to them. But what's always interesting is that we always sort of make it a point to get those kids over the fear of that while they're here. Yeah. And so they might be crying when bees are flying around them whenever they get here. And then, we can get them to be at the point where they're looking at the bees underneath a magnifying glass, underneath like a Penstemon digitalis plant or something like that, because bees aren't ever going to sting you. I've been here for 4 years. A bee's never stung me. A wasp hasn't stung me.
Nope.
As long as the food is there, they're not going to bother you at all. So I think that's a really crucial point of what we do here at our location. It's just providing these kids opportunities to see sort of what the land, should look like, or it did look like 50 to 100 years ago, essentially.
Yeah. So well, my main fear of butterflies is that I'm going to hurt them because they seem so fragile.
Yeah.
So I love having them fly around me. And I went into the butterfly room at the Euchee butterfly farm, and it was really exciting to have them all swirling around. It's very cool. But you talked about species a minute ago, and you used some scientific names of the Penstemon. And I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of formal Western scientific information and traditional knowledge, and the intersection of how we bring together the traditional knowledge with scientific knowledge to make a difference in the world.
I think it's really important. The tribes around here in Oklahoma, they have their seed banks and such like that. We've worked in Minnesota with tribal lines for pollinators as of the past year and a half. And what was really nice about the tribes up in Minnesota is that they would have a tribal wildlife biologist, which I think is a fantastic thing. Every tribe should have a wildlife biologist. I understand these tribes are smaller and such in Oklahoma. That's the dream, essentially. The dream is to have every tribe that has a wildlife biologist to relay this information, because it is important. Because the cultural knowledge obviously is very, very, very important. But if you don't have sort of the ecological background to preserve these plant species, these culturally significant species, they're just going to diminish away further and further and further. And every single aspect of Oklahoma, if you go an hour east of us right now, it's going to look entirely different than where we're at right now. You go an hour west, it's going to look entirely different than where we're at now, and vice versa. And so all these tribes, in my opinion, have sort of a responsibility to not only, preserve that cultural knowledge, but as well as maintain the land that's providing, where all that knowledge is coming from. And so that's what I really like about this position, is that I get to work with the tribes all throughout Oklahoma, and they might provide me some, culturally significant names of the plant species, and then some photos as well, but they don't necessarily know the scientific name of it. And so that's where we sort of come in. If they can send us photos, they can take us to the actual plant itself in person. We can identify it down to a species level. We record all the ecological information in terms of where it's at. We take GPS points, what's around it, what other native plants are growing around it. We look at the geology. We look at online at what pollinators might be using it as a host plant as well, which, all of this information just sort of gets thrown into, sort of a document, and then we can provide that to the tribe. And then so they can have not only the cultural understanding of it, but as well as the ecological significance of it. And so it ties in really, really well with terms of education as well, going back to the youth, because a lot of the tribes have stories among different species of plants of, why it's here. And so if we can tie in more ecological information and, tie a monarch to that story as well, it really sticks pretty well, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add to that is, unfortunately, through so many different facets, a lot of these plants are more difficult to find or completely gone from the areas that they were at. So us being able to find these plants for those people who are having trouble finding them, and then we can grow them out and then give them those plants so they can plant locally, so they don't have to collect from wild populations and further diminish that those population numbers, is a really big deal to me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So it's possible for people to essentially over collect something that's rare,
sure,
and then it's no longer in the wild. It may be growing on some controlled setting, but that's not the same as it being available in the wild. So when you collect seeds, you're not harvesting the plant necessarily. You're collecting some portion of the seeds to germinate and give people plugs, or to give people seeds. How does tell me a little bit about that process?
Yeah. We only collect seeds when we go to properties and stuff like that. I never dig anything up. Digging up stuff is you have to know what you're doing, essentially. And I generally I have the knowledge of what you could dig up and what does and doesn't work. You have to learn about the taproot systems and understand what's going on and do it at the right time of the year. I generally don't touch on it whenever I do my presentations, just because the seeds is always going to be, collecting seeds is always going to be a lot better for not only the host population of where you're collecting from, but in terms of your output as well. You can dig up one plant, okay, great, and you get it to move one spot, but then you take away that plant from its original location. Whereas you could have just waited, 4 months and then collected the seeds and then had, 50, plant seedlings, and then grow all those out pretty easily. And then, have a much greater number of them. But that's generally what we do. Is people ask us to come out to their properties to do a survey, and so we'll write down everything for them, what's out there, what is non-native as well is another thing that we do. So we kind of advise on land management as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, seeds are always going to be the way to go. Yep.
Yeah, and I think I recall from when I was out there that you've found some species that maybe weren't known in Oklahoma before, or
there's just a particular rare species here in Oklahoma, here at the farm, actually. It's quite rare. I don't remember. Is it a county record, Brandon? I don't remember.
Yes, it is a county record. Yeah. We have a Nablus asper or Pernanthes asper. It kind of depends on how old your key is you're looking at. And that's been here on the farm. And it's the only record of it. We have the only records of it. Oklahoma University doesn't even have herbarium records of it. And it used to be a pretty dense species back in, the 1800s. There's historical documents that I've read where they talk about it as like a roadside weed. And nowadays we can't find it. The only other population I know of it is out in Osage County, which is like a hour and a half west of us, and I imagine that's on the Nature Conservancy land. But we've actually seen it spreading. Collin just noted to me that it's actually spreading on our property now, which is really great because we can collect seeds of it, we can grow it out. It's a really unique species, I didn't mention the common name. The common name is rough rattlesnake root. So collecting these rare species is really important to us because, we have on the farm a true prairie remnant. And so what a true prairie remnant is essentially land that hasn't been disturbed for 100+ years. And so thankfully, Jane Breckenridge, this land has been in her family for a couple, centuries now. And so our prairie remnant, where this rough rattlesnake is growing, has never been used for grazing. It's never been plowed. We just burned it in December. And so I'm really excited to see what new species are going to come up since I've even been here. Because I think I got a pretty good idea of what's out there currently, but with this new burn coming through, I guarantee I'm going to see some new species this spring and summer. Definitely. It's going to be exciting.
Mm-hmm.
That is cool. So just quickly talk about the importance of fire, because that comes up a lot, especially in prairies and fire suppression, and like what happens when you burn.
Yeah. So what the big important part of burning is that, you have to sort of think about it, outside of just humans. Back in, 1,000 years ago, fire was prevalent throughout all of Oklahoma. People talk about trees all the time. We need to plant a tree, and we're conserving habitat. Most of Oklahoma, especially the western side, there wasn't a lot of trees because fire would come through historically and wipe those eastern red cedars out, even though they are a native tree. And so the fires essentially are sort of the cleaning crew of the prairie. And so it burns up a lot of that understory. And what's really good for that is that it allows birds to make nesting habitat, because, after about 4 seasons, a lot of birds aren't going to nest in a prairie system because there's too much woody understory. 4 seasons is sort of that tipping point. And so fire comes through and clears that out. Birds have grown up with that. The turtles have grown up with that evolutionarily. And so they have an intricate relationship between each other.
We also now know that native prairies are amazing carbon sinks, and because of their deep root systems and the way the soil is, and that by burning them, you're actually net adding carbon to the ground, because you get so much productivity the following season that you're actually sucking more carbon out than you're putting in through the fire. So it's an important component in so many different ways to the ecology of the local area, as well as to, I think, our overall planetary health.
Absolutely.
Another thing about fire is some plants need them to even break their dormancy. Some plants need exposure to those heat levels. Sometimes it's smoke. And then some species need access to light. So in some of these fields, the understory is too thick, like Brandon was saying, and those seeds don't get exposed to light, and therefore they don't germinate. Come through with a fire, and then you're going to have some species that you didn't have before that needed the light, that have just been waiting for a long time to germinate. There was one of our colleagues down in Atoka in the Choctaw Nation is remediating some of his land. Some of that is knocking down eastern red cedars. And he said he knocked it down, and then the next year, a lot of different species of bee balm just popped up. He didn't plant them, he didn't seed or anything. They were just laying in the seed bank, waiting.
Right. That's really cool. So I want to give you guys each a chance to, just from your perspectives of growing up in Oklahoma and being involved in this field and thinking about the future, what else should I have asked you about, or what do you want to communicate to the listeners?
A lot of people think of Oklahoma as a flyover state, and in some ways it is. But if you're interested in biology, it is certainly not a place that you want to miss. We are a very diverse state biologically. So everything is really interesting. The southeast, you've got like swamps and alligators, and in the northwest, you've got the Panhandle, which is very arid. It's like a desert. It's really amazing. The elevation change is like I think it's 1,500 feet from the Panhandle to the southeast. It's just a very diverse state. So if you're interested in biology, Oklahoma is a very cool place to be.
Let me just say, I completely agree. I went to Oklahoma for the first time last year and had the chance to go out in the field with some of the members of the Oklahoma Natural Heritage Program and spent some time on the butterfly farm. And it was spectacular and awesome. And I'm looking forward to coming back. So, Brandon?
Yeah. if, two goobers like Colin and I can manage to, create a large seed bank like this, anybody can really do it. And so that's what I really want to do with the tribes around here in Oklahoma, because we're not, I don't think we're anything special in terms of the botanical knowledge that we had. It can all be readily learned for sure.
Right.
And so it's very accessible. And no matter what you're trying to do for conservation, you want more quail, you want more prairie chickens, you want more deer, it's all going to be coming back to plants. Plants are sort of the core building block of conservation, in my opinion. So it's important to understand. And so that's what I'm trying to do with the tribes here in Oklahoma, is just get everybody on board, get everybody to, understand how to identify this stuff and how to collect seeds and how to grow it. Because, we can grow this stuff all day, but what's really going to make a difference is if we have, a couple pairs of, a Colin and Brandon, in every tribe in Oklahoma. That's where we're going to make a big difference.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I love the comment about sort of, you basically didn't say it this way, but diversity begets diversity. You're not going to have 10 species of birds in a monoculture. If you have diverse number of birds, diverse plants, that
absolutely
positive feedback cycle. Well, Colin, Brandon, a couple of goobers that I really like. Haven't heard anybody say that word in a really long time. I appreciate that.
It's pretty apt, I think. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time today, and I also really appreciate what you're doing for the future and for native plants, because I think this is a really important feature, not just in Oklahoma. We need to be thinking about native plants and native species all across the world, really. So thank you for doing that. And I also want to thank Jane Breckenridge for creating the butterfly farm and the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, and for giving you the time to engage in this conversation today.
Yeah, literally would not be here without her.
No, it's all thanks to Jane.
That's all thanks to Jane. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're really appreciative of her too, as one of our board members.
Yeah.
So thank you for being on the show, and thanks to our listeners for listening to Conservation Conversations this month with Collin Spriggs and Brandon Gibson from the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators. And thank you, gentlemen, for the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, that was awesome.
All right. And as everyone knows who's listening, NatureServe is a nonprofit organization, and we appreciate your support. You can donate to NatureServe through our website at natureserve.org. You can also, of course, as everybody always says on podcasts, like us on your favorite podcast platform and give us a good review, because that really helps. And the more exposure that NatureServe gets, the more our message about conservation and biodiversity and native species gets out there for the world to learn and understand. So thank you for joining us, and we'll look forward to talking to you next month.